Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Linkzilla, and today I just got back from seeing Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Folks, you can honestly prepare yourself in all kinds of ways. You can basically build up your mental fortitude in anticipation for something, and yet you still honestly have to see it to believe it. You can honestly just go along with the rumors about how bad and insulting something is, but there's always going to be that burning curiosity within you that honestly drives you to know for sure, as well as your sense of loyalty and obligation to a franchise that you have loved literally since you were a child, and not wanting to miss the opportunity of seeing one last adventure in the movie theater. And then you actually go to see it for yourself. And honestly, folks, I'm a bit stumped. I think this movie might have actually broken me. I strangely have nothing to say about it, at least nothing all that significant. You would think that this movie would make me so angry that I would just be on an absolutely livid rant about this movie's lack of quality, but I honestly don't think I can even muster that level of emotion for this thing. This movie left me feeling empty and hollow because it is just boring. There are action sequences in the movie, but they feel so tired. Like everything that's done in this movie, we've seen done better in other movies. A lot of these a lot of this movie is basically just reusing the same tropes that have done well in other movies, and there really is nothing new or spectacular to look at. So, part of the reason that I went to see this movie is because my sister and her husband have seen it, and they basically claim that it was so good. And they actually wanted to talk to me about it, considering that I'm basically an expert on this franchise, and were surprised that I hadn't gone to see it, despite all the crap that's happened in this rather depressing year. Now, don't get me wrong. I know from experience that I happen to be a bit more critical and a bit more judgmental of movies than my sister or anyone in my family, really, because I actually have trained myself to pay attention to these sorts of things and I know what to be on the lookout for. But even still, at some point, I had to wonder, what if all of the rumors are mere exaggeration? What if I could go to this movie and actually have a good time? What if I could just enjoy it? Isn't it worth finding out? No, it wasn't. So, how would I rate this movie with my critical analysis background? This movie is watchable. Yeah, you heard that right, folks. This movie actually is just plain watchable. I'm not outright saying that it's horrible, as in, there's absolutely no redeeming quality about this movie at all. In fact, this movie actually does have its moments. The problem is, there's a difference between being watchable and being enjoyable, because this movie, while you certainly can watch it, you're certainly not going to have that much fun while watching it. And it really is a shame because the director of this movie is, according to some people, a competent director since he directed Logan. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Logan, but at least you could say that it had very good blocking. but a lot of things about this movie just didn't gel well. Like, the editing process on this movie must have been a madhouse, because there are a lot of sequences where the iconic Indiana Jones music either should be playing or isn't being played at the proper moment. It's like they didn't know when or where to use the music, which is odd because Sir John Williams is supposed to be composing for this thing. And therein comes the big point in all of this. The truth is, anybody who is not in the know about what is going on at Lucasfilm, and someone who is completely able to just turn off their brains and take the movie as an isolated piece of entertainment, and probably who doesn't know all that much about anything in regards to the world of film at all, they could probably enjoy this film and actually consider it to be good. But the simple fact is, those people are uninitiated and they're unaware of what's going on. When you actually are aware of what's going on, you realize that not only is this movie bad, it's downright insulting. For the one thing, like I said about how the editing in this movie just really doesn't gel well, that's basically because, well, hashtag Doomcock was right. This movie is a stitch wraith. It's literally been stitched together from various different Indiana Jones films to create this Frankenstein's monster abomination of a film. Effectively speaking, it's 3 movies in one. You have the movie that James Mangold wanted to make, you have the movie that Kathleen Kennedy wanted to make, and then you have the movie that Disney wanted to make, which actually might have been entertaining. But when you try to stitch all 3 of these things together, you get a boring, incohesive mess that never really takes off. And honestly, it just doesn't really feel all that much like an Indiana Jones movie. Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford, he never gets any of the classic Indiana Jones moments that the franchise is known for. Like, take for example, in every single movie, the bad guys always have a really big henchman working for them, and at some point in the movie, it's expected that Indy is going to have a knockdown, drag-out, bare-knuckle fight with him. And even though Indy is basically going to get hurt, he's going to get punched, eventually he's going to do something to outsmart this guy. He's going to use the environment to his advantage, and he's going to be able to kick this guy's ass. That doesn't happen in this movie, which is a shame because the bad guys do have this really big henchman. This guy, I honestly keep looking at this guy like he's CGI because this guy is impossibly huge, especially compared to Harrison Ford. Like, if they were to actually get into a fist fight, I'm pretty sure that this guy would easily be able to fold Indy. But that's honestly why seeing Indy eventually being able to outsmart him and finally knock his lights out would end up being so satisfying. But it doesn't happen because this guy gets taken out before even the 3rd act. There really is no moment in the movie that justifies the blaring of the Indiana Jones theme music. And ironically, the theme music is used so rarely throughout this movie that it almost seems like they knew that this movie was unworthy of it. The villain, played by Mads Mikkelsen, is boring. So boring that you only hear his real name in the film, like, twice. And he just has absolutely no presence in this movie. He doesn't actually do anything scary or intimidating. He doesn't have any iconic lines, although he has some real stupid lines, I should say. He doesn't come off as all that big a threat, and his plan at the very end is actually kind of confusing. Like, let's just put it out there. We all know that this movie at this point is about time travel, because somehow or another, the artifact in this movie will allow people not to travel through time, but to instead detect fissures in time that they can then manipulate to use to go across time. This guy wants to use the Archimedes dial to travel back to the 1940s and assassinate Hitler. He wants to kill Adolf Hitler so that he can take over the Nazi Party and lead the Axis powers to victory in World War II. Effectively speaking, his motivation is Hitler made a whole bunch of mistakes and I saw every single one of them. I know how to correct them. He wants to go back in time and basically he wants to win the war by taking Hitler out of power. He literally says Hitler started a fire that could have burned for eternity. I'm going to keep it going. Now, the reason why I say that's confusing is because I'm pretty sure that most historians agree that if Hitler was killed, as well as most of the inner circle surrounding him, that would have actually put an end to the war, at least on the German front. But anyways, so this guy just really had nothing going for him. And it's a shame waste of Mads Mikkelsen because you know that he can play better villains than this. Although, I'm starting to wonder if that's true, because, when you think about Mads Mikkelsen playing villains, how many of them have actually been memorable? Exactly. One of the things I find really just annoying about this movie is that everything feels kind of stupid in this film. Indy himself kind of feels a bit dumber than he's supposed to be. Anybody who's seen the original movies know that Indy is supposed to be smarter than this, and the excuse that you're making right now is, well, this movie is when Indiana Jones is in his 80s. You can't expect him to be a spry young mind forever. That's a very good point. Except the scene that I'm talking about takes place in a flashback at the prologue of the movie during the 1940s when Indy was still a relatively young man compared to what he is throughout the rest of the movie. I mean, how long does it take for someone to take their neck out of a goddamn noose when they realize that the building around them is collapsing? Anyways, another thing that I find really dumb is that there's this subplot that goes absolutely nowhere. You see, at some point in the movie, the bad guys are trying to capture Indy to get the artifact from him. They end up shooting a bunch of innocent civilians. Indy goes to check on the civilians' bodies to see if they're still alive, and he gets their blood on his hands. He then immediately calls the police trying to get help. The camera lingers on the it lingers on the phone to show the blood is still there, and from that, the movie is giving us the impression of what we're meant to infer. We then hear from a news report saying that Indy is now the #1 suspect in this killing. They think that he apparently went crazy and murdered all these people because of the bloody handprint with his fingerprints on it on the phone that was used to call the police. That honestly just feels so dumb. And the worst part about it is, the movie ends before that subplot is ever addressed again, and it's never properly resolved. Indy has to flee from the city because everyone, the law enforcement in the city, is on a manhunt looking for him. He goes on this adventure because he's partially going into hiding so that he could find enough evidence to clear his name. And yet the whole concept of him clearing his name is literally not brought up ever again. The movie literally ends before we ever get any sort of resolution on that. And, of course, Now we have to talk about the absolute worst thing about this movie. The character Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Indiana Jones's goddaughter. Truth be told, when I first started seeing trailers for the movie, I was actually intrigued by the idea that Indy apparently had a goddaughter out there. That must mean that her father was a trusted friend of Indy's that really must have trusted him to take care of his child if anything were to happen to him. I wonder who this person could possibly be. Yeah, it turns out to be a brand new character that gets introduced in the 1944 prologue that we had never seen before. That's honestly a big problem with this Legacy movie, is that basically, apart from Sala, Indy is the only returning character in this movie. Although there is somebody else, but we'll get to that, won't we? So, honestly, it just kind of feels rather irritating at the fact that this character is supposed to be built up to be someone very important in Indy's life, and yet they're basically just created solely for this movie. Not even basically as a reference to maybe somebody from an older film. Somebody who might have been allies with Indy back in the past. Someone that he might have actually known. Instead of just this new character. But anyways, let's talk about Waller herself. She is intolerable. She is literally the most insufferable character I have seen in this franchise. One of the biggest concerns that people had for this film is that this girl, Helena, was going to take point in this movie and become the main character, and that Indy was basically going to be her sidekick. And I have to agree that low-key that does happen. I admit that it's not nearly as exaggerated as some others want to make the claim, because I honestly think that Indy does do a lot for himself in this movie, and the fact that they actually start out on antagonistic fronts. You see, after Indy's retirement party at Hunter College, not Marshall College, where he was associate dean of students, after his retirement party, he goes to a bar where Helena basically catches up with him, reveals that she's his goddaughter, and that she has become an archaeologist too. She's just graduated and is now working on her doctorate. She basically brings up the fact that her father was a big researcher into the Archimedes dial, the MacGuffin for this movie, and that he and her father actually found it back in 1944, back in the prologue, but apparently they lost it in a river somewhere. She says that she wants to go to Switzerland and recover the dial so that she can become famous, and she wants him to guide her there. Yeah. I think we can honestly tell where this character is going. It's kind of a rule of thumb that when you have a character who presents themselves like this, they are really not what they seem. And Hollywood seems to have forgotten the golden rule that you can't introduce a character and have them be this obnoxious and want them to and want the audience to actually like them by the end of the movie. Sorry, but that just goes too far. You have to show a balance of their likable qualities as well as their unlikable qualities. And this girl basically had don't trust me written all over her. At least Elsa could be subtle about it. Basically, the movie low-key reveals that the entire story about Switzerland was a lie. Indy and her father actually got the dial back to the States, but because her father was becoming so obsessed with it, Indy took the dial away and had it hidden in the storage room at the college. So he goes into the archives to recover the dial and show it to her. At which point she basically lets the mask slip that she knew that Indiana Jones had it the entire time. because she was actually there witnessing the argument that he and her father had when she was at least 12. And it's at this point that the bad guys try and capture her to get the dial, at which point she basically leaves Indy behind for dead. The incident with the two innocent people getting shot happens. Indy gets framed for the crime, so he ends up calling Sala to basically come and take him to a safe house and to take him to the airport. It turns out that Sala has actually done some research on Helena, and as it turns out, she's not a student of archaeology at all. She's a thief. Apparently, she was imprisoned a few years ago for selling artifacts on the black market, and she got bailed out of prison by some big time mobster in Tangier. She came to Indy to get the dial so that she could sell it on the black market. Ladies and gentlemen, Indiana Jones's goddaughter and the would-be protagonist that's supposed to carry us through this movie and one day replace Indiana Jones. Yeah, Helena is just a completely obnoxious, smarmy, arrogant little shit. And quite frankly, the actress who portrays her, she's a stork. Yeah, her neck is too long, the nose is too long. She is just really frustrating to look at. And the worst part about it is, every single time Helena opens her mouth, she literally makes the situation worse. And I'm left thinking, does the movie expect us to find this humorous? Did the people who wrote and make this film think that this was amusing for us? Now, like I said, the worst part about this movie is that this movie could at least be watchable if you're not initiated. But when you are in the know, you start to realize exactly what's going on with this character, this Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. You see, we've got another Rey Palpatine situation here. Because Helena is introduced into this movie, and she is just the bestest ever. She literally is accomplishing so many things that Indy can't do. She is rescuing Indy a few times throughout the movie. Effectively, she is a Mary Sue. And why? Well, when you take a look at her, it quite frankly becomes obvious. Helena, much like how Rey was in the new Star Wars trilogy, is nothing more than Kathleen Kennedy's self-insert fanfiction avatar. She literally inserted herself into the Indiana Jones movies just so that she could show up the Indiana Jones franchise and basically steal the reins away from the series' main character. You know, this quite frankly reminds me of something back in college. One of my college professors showed this painting that was from this family, this wealthy family, and the painting even included the servants that they had in the background. Apparently, some modern-day artist decided to take this painting and destroy it, literally scrunching out the actual family, the people who paid for the damn portrait, and instead focusing entirely on the servants in the background as a literal political statement. He entitled this piece, "Enough About You." Literally speaking, that is just so friggin' obnoxious. These people who were even lucky to be a part of the portrait in the first place do not deserve the spotlight. And yet certain people think that they are entitled to the spotlight. So I can't really go into much more about why the movie is bad without talking about the ending. So, like I said, the whole thing with the Archimedes dial is that it somehow allowed it's somehow mixed up in time travel, which the movie conveniently doesn't explain all that well, and the bad guy wants to use it to go back so that he can course correct the trajectory of World War II to end in the Nazis' favor. Except when we actually go through the portal, instead of going back, I don't know, 40 to 20 years back to World War II, we instead end up going 2,000 years back to the Roman siege of Syracuse. Apparently, Archimedes designed the dial to literally be a closed circuit time loop, as in, the only time travel that was possible was something that was already fated to happen, because the dial wasn't even finished at the time that they ended up traveling back in time to. So, effectively speaking, I hate closed loop time travel. The idea that the only time travel that can exist is that which is already fated to happen. And why did Archimedes do this? He did this in the hopes of getting help from the future, that someone would find the dial and travel back in time to help Greece defeat the Romans as they invaded Syracuse. And the movie ends on such a strange note because at this point, Indy has been shot and he's actually been bleeding to death for roughly the last 20 minutes, I should say. Now, I don't know how long it takes to actually bleed out, but I'm pretty sure that 20 minutes of uninterrupted bleeding without closing the wound, that's actually going to be not so good to come back from. Indy gets the idea that he's dying anyway. Just leave me in the past so that I can witness this. Let me die here so that I can become a part of history. And, well, it's a bit confusing because people have equated this to being character assassination because the movie tries to point out that if Indy stays behind in the past, he will fundamentally alter the past and thus change the course of history, effectively destroying the life's work that he himself has spent studying. He devoted his life to studying the past and studying history. By basically going back in time and changing it, he'll be undoing all his work. Yeah, that's a good point for the movie to be making if they hadn't already established that the Archimedes dial works on a closed time loop, as in Indy and Helena and the Nazis. They are only allowed to be there because they were literally always meant to be there. It's literally the cart before the horse situation. It's the chicken and egg paradox, the grandfather paradox. There's no true beginning. It's just one endless closed loop that's going to continue throughout the course of history. So anyway, all throughout this time, Helena is trying to convince Indy, no, you can't stay here, you have to come back with me, you have so much more to live for. I would like to point out that this is the woman who lied to him, double-crossed him, and actively tried to get him killed several times throughout the movie. And yet, at this point, we're supposed to believe that she's learned her lesson and become a good girl now. So what does she end up doing to get Indy to see reason? She doesn't. Indy never sees reason. She instead punches him in the face and knocks him out in one blow. So I would like to point out that this character is Kathleen Kennedy's self-insert fan avatar, and she just punched out an 80-year-old senior citizen. Hope you feel accomplished of yourself, Kathleen. You basically have destroyed this man on so many fundamental levels. You tried to basically destroy his integrity by claiming that he's perfectly okay with altering the course of history by staying in the past, but then you basically literally have to knock him out and basically have him be abducted against his will. At this point, it's elder abuse. So I will admit that this ultimately leads into a rather good ending. There's a chance that someone who watches this movie could be completely blindsided by how nice and how good the end of the movie actually is. And that's basically one of the biggest problems, because you see, the end of this movie isn't the actual end of this movie. It's the ending that was haphazardly thrown together and filmed rather quickly this year and slapped on the end of the film in order to correct Kathleen Kennedy's mistake. You remember how I said that there were three movies at play here? There was one movie that James Mangold wanted to do, and there was one movie where Kathleen Kennedy wanted to do, and then there was the movie that Disney wanted to do. You know what Kathleen Kennedy's movie looked like? Like I said, Doomcock was right. More than a year ago, he basically got information that the ending of this film, as intended by Kathleen Kennedy, was that they actually do succeed in going back into back to World War II, or even farther than that. It's supposed to be all the way in the past. I think back as far as World War One, because the villain's motivation isn't to kill Adolf Hitler and take his place. No, in the original script, he wants to kill Indiana Jones and erase him from history. And unfortunately, in Kathleen Kennedy's version of this movie, he succeeds. Young Indy gets shot, which causes old Indy to disappear, Marty McFly style, from Back to the Future. And you want to know how the movie ends avoiding a serious time paradox? Helena stays in the past and literally steps into Indiana Jones's shoes. She ends up living Indy's life in his place, becoming the new Indiana Jones, because she has literally replaced the old one. Yep. Kathleen Kennedy wasn't simply going to kill Indiana Jones in her intended version of the movie. She was going to erase him. She was literally going to erase him and replace him with a female counterpart, just so that she can make the claim that Indiana Jones, is now perfect, because she did everything that Indy did, except better. Honestly, it's a saving grace that that ending didn't get used, but it's also a bit of a double-edged sword, because, like I said, this movie, as in its current form, the disjointed and uncohesive mess, incoherent mess that it actually is actually passable by the standards of our general moving-going audiences. They don't know better, so they're going to think that this movie is perfectly okay. I honestly think that this movie needed to be worse than it ended up being. Why? Let's say, for example, if that ending actually did see the light of day. If, by some miracle, Bobby Iger, he had his brain replaced by a piece of broccoli and didn't shut this thing down. He didn't try to cut the head off the snake when the backlash against it came out. If we actually saw this ending that basically saw Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones literally replaced by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, because it was filmed. It's basically been confirmed at this point that it was all filmed and even edited, and that Bob Iger actually saw it, and he literally said, "You gotta change that. You cannot put out the movie if it ends like that." What I'm basically saying is that if that version of the movie actually saw the light of day, there'd be no hiding anymore. There'd be no plausible deniability. There'd be no denying it at all. Everyone would now believe what we are saying when we tell them what Kathleen Kennedy is all about. And they would have no choice but to accept it. They wouldn't basically be able to hide behind any kind of excuses, and that they would basically be exposed for what they are as well. But we didn't get that ending. Instead, the movie tries to end off on a high note, one that honestly makes me feel a mix of emotions because it honestly pisses me off, but at the same time, it actually kind of made me feel good. What do I mean? Well, one of the biggest things that I was afraid of going into Kingdom of the Crystal Skull more than 12 years ago at this point was that the movie was going to be filled with a whole bunch of old man jokes at Indiana Jones's expense. And yet, to my knowledge, there were only like maybe 2 of those jokes in that entire movie. Meanwhile, this movie is literally nothing but those types of jokes at Indiana Jones's expense. And we actually have a track record from what Kathleen Kennedy has been known to do with legacy characters from her franchises, like, say, Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, played by Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill, respectively. Literally speaking, apparently Han Solo and Luke Skywalker were so upset about Ben Solo turning to the dark side that Han, the boy's father, became a burned-out alcoholic who decided to abandon his wife and go back to smuggling. Meanwhile, his uncle, Luke Skywalker, decides, I'm going to abandon all of my ideals and all my principles and everything that I've worked so hard for my entire life, what I fought and bled for, what I lost a goddamn hand for, and I'm just basically just going to go to this island and peace out until I die. Yeah, that's what Kathleen Kennedy did to your childhood heroes, and this is what she tried to do to Indiana Jones. I literally remember it. I told it to my father. I don't know if it was 6 months ago. I don't know if it was 8 months ago. I don't know if it was a full year ago or not, but at some point during the anticipation for this movie, I literally told my father, I will bet you $5 that at the start of this movie, Indy and Marion have gotten divorced and Indy is a burned out drunk. The first scene that we get in 1969 is Indy in his apartment, passed out in front of the television in his underwear. So we get to see 80-year-old Harrison Ford in all of his near-naked glory. We see him make himself a cup of coffee after complaining like a cranky old man that his neighbor's music is too loud, and then spiking said cup of coffee with about half a bottle of whiskey. Burned out drunk? Check. And then, while he's drinking his coffee, he looks down at his kitchen counter and sees a notice of separation and proceedings for divorce signed by Marion Ravenwood. Yep, they're getting divorced. So that's $5 for me, Dad. And why did they get divorced? Well, here comes the overcorrection problem. The tendency that filmmakers have when in response to backlash from how poorly previous movies have been received, that they try to correct the problem in the sequel, only to go too far with overcorrecting it. You know, like what the Disney sequel trilogy did with Star Wars. People hated the prequels so much that these movies tried to stay as close to the original trilogy as possible, and therefore no longer have their own identity. I made a big deal about Indiana Jones having a goddaughter in this movie because that's who Helena is supposed to be, but I know that you're all asking, what happened to Mutt Williams, Indiana Jones's actual son, Henry Jones III, played by Shia LaBeouf? Where is Mutt? He's dead. They killed him. Apparently, when the Vietnam War started, Mutt enlisted for the war, specifically just to piss Indy off. He went off to war and he got killed. Now, the movie specifically says that he enlisted just to piss Indy off and basically make it seem like Indy had the chance to stop him from doing this. But think about it for a second. This is Vietnam we're talking about. And this is only about 12 years after the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull that took place in 1957. Mutt was only 19 years old at the time of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, so 12 years later he'd only be 31. I'm pretty sure that that's still draft age. Mutt would still be under the draft until at least he was 35 years of age, so he still had 4 years. So, regardless of Mutt enlisting or not, he was going to Vietnam. So, I guess it's just something that the movie did to make Indy feel extra guilty when he literally had no power over it. But let's think about that for a second. I know that not a lot of people liked Shia LaBeouf as Mutt Williams in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and while I do think that it is surreal seeing Louis Stevens as Indiana Jones's son, I honestly don't think he's all that bad. He does exactly what he's needed to do for the movie, and, well, quite frankly, he's a much more entertaining and likable character than Helena is, but they decided to kill him off because they think that the fan base doesn't like him and that they would rejoice at hearing that he's killed off, only to instead basically all so that they don't have to address the fact that he's not in the movie. And I find it so ironic that a lot of people accuse Mutt Williams of replacing Indiana Jones at the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, when the end of that movie literally shows that that's not the case, whereas Helena Shaw was literally created to replace Indiana Jones. So because Mutt enlisted in the Vietnam War and he got killed, Marion flew into despair. She was overcome with grief and she didn't know how to manage that. And Indy was unable to comfort her given the loss of their son, and it caused their marriage to fall apart. So literally, the happy ending, the happy marriage that Indy got at the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he's finally married the love of his life, and he can start a brand new future with his son, Mutt Williams. All of that was literally ripped away from him. And for what? So that James Mangold can do what he did to Logan? Literally rip away the perfect happy ending of Days of Futures Past? Nope. It's actually a bit more sinister than that. You see, it was actually pointed out to me later on that by killing off Mutt Williams, Kathleen Kennedy has successfully killed off the Joneses' bloodline, as in, Indiana Jones is all that's left. And don't get me wrong, at 80 years old, I honestly don't think he's going to be having any more kids with Marion, meaning, effectively speaking, she has succeeded in destroying Indiana Jones' legacy because she completely wiped out his lineage. But let's talk about the end of the movie, because, as I said, Indiana Jones and Marion Ravenwood have gotten divorced, and that Indy is now living alone in this dive apartment, and he's a burned-out drunk. He doesn't feel like he has anything to live for anymore, which is why he's ready to just stay behind 2,000 years in the past and die so that he can become a permanent part of history. And Fleabag punches him out. When he wakes up, he's back in his apartment, his bullet wounds have been tended to, and he basically gets up and, talks to Helena, saying that you should have left me there. It's at that point where Marion walks into the apartment, carrying groceries. Apparently, she has been here helping Helena take care of Indy while he's been unconscious because she was so worried about him. They leave Indy and Marion alone in the apartment for a while, and we get kind of a reconciliation with them. That basically they still clearly love each other, and that they actually have a recreation of a scene that took place in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where basically after Indy has pretty much been through hell. He got dragged by a truck. He got shot in the arm, and basically he had to fight tooth and nail in order to get the Ark of the Covenant away from the Nazis. Literally every part of his body hurts, so Marion asks him what parts of his body don't hurt, and he tells her, and she kisses every single part of him that doesn't hurt until she eventually kisses him on the lips. That's from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and so right now, like, Marion basically says she's a bit confused by all this and just says that right now everything hurts. And so Indy asks her what doesn't hurt. And, much like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, she points to her elbow, Indy kisses it, she points to her neck, he kisses her there, and then they kiss each other. And, well, the movie then pans out to the apartment with Helena basically walking with Sala and his kids as they basically leave Indy alone in his apartment with his ex-wife, I guess. The camera pans up and then focuses on Indy's iconic hat being hung out on a laundry line, a clothesline, like it's drying off or something. And then it does something weird. You would think that this would be the point where the Indiana Jones music plays and the credits begin to roll. No, instead the camera begins to iris in on the hat, kind of like implying that, yep, this is the end. The adventures are all over. That's the end of Indiana Jones. And yet right before everything goes dark, you see Indy's hand reach out and grab the hat and pull it back through the window. That, I admit, was actually kind of a nice little touch, because even though we all know that this is the final Indiana Jones movie, they sort of tease us with the idea that maybe the adventures aren't over yet. So, admittedly, that was a nice little ending, and it was filled with a whole bunch of lovely fan service that's meant to basically be an apology note to all the fans of the franchise who just sat through this mess. But like I said, it's clear that this portion of the movie was not intended for the rest of the movie. This was tacked on at the very end, and it's proved because Sir John Williams literally admitted we had to completely refilm a different ending for the movie, and I just got finished done scoring it, so that's basically like. And even the woman who played Marion basically confirms that it was because of this reshoot that she ended up being brought onto the movie in the first place. Yeah, they basically, weren't going to include her, and then a few months ago, they suddenly start teasing, oh, good news, Marion Ravenwood might be in this movie. What's she gonna do? What's it gonna be like? They wanted to basically try and buy goodwill from the fans. So like I said, the ending of this movie made me smile, and I actually left the theater with listening to the Indiana Jones music playing during the credits, but it's deceptive in that way. You can't basically get a good movie out of one or two good things that happen in it. And like I said, it's deceptive the way this movie ends, trying to end on such a high note when it comes to everything that they put Indy through in this movie. And it comes off as a bit insulting considering that they took all those things away from Indy. They took away his son, they took away his loving wife, they even took away the guy's house. They took away his job at Marshall College as Associate Dean of Students, and for some reason they stuck him in this Hunter College where he's just a professor of archaeology again, and he's living in this crappy dive apartment with a jerk neighbor. And of course, they gave him a complete sociopath for a goddaughter who is only ever interested in money. Literally speaking, at some point in the movie, she says there's literally only one thing in the world that's ever worth believing in, and that's cash. Ugh. Honestly, I can't tell you all that much about the movie, apart from the fact that Antonio Banderas is in it. The movie, it really doesn't feel like it ever truly gets going. There's no moment in the movie where you feel excited about what's happening. You just kind of think, okay, where's it going next? Come on, stop dragging your feet. Get on with it. Get on with it. And what's even more incredible is the fact that Indiana Jones feels like a passenger in this movie. Literally, the first half of the movie is literally focused on him. It's all about him being the driving action force, when suddenly, halfway through the movie, he becomes a passenger and ends up focusing on Helena. Like I said, Indy gets shot in this movie, and instead of killing him when he had the chance, the villain decides, I'm going to take you with me. I'm going to show you the genius of my plan, and then I'm going to kill you. He takes him up onto the plane, where he intends to fly through the time dilation back to the 1940s and stop and prevent, no, not the 1940s, 1939, and so that he can take over the Nazi Party. And we get this action scene of Helena riding on a motorcycle, chasing after the plane, trying to get on the plane so that she can rescue Indy. I'm sorry, but this literally should have been reversed. This should have been Indy riding on the motorcycle trying to save her. Why? Because this is the moment that should have had the Indiana Jones theme music. Can you just imagine it? Hearing the Indiana Jones theme playing, watching Indy riding on a motorcycle in a rainstorm trying to board a plane as it is lifting off the tarmac? That would have been amazing to see. Also, I just gotta say it, to the people who complain about the CGI groundhogs and monkeys from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, you are literally not allowed to complain about that ever again after I just witnessed these horrible CGI weather effects from this movie. I mean, seriously, they couldn't actually film this in rain. They couldn't, well, I don't know, get a rain simulator to actually dump water on the actors. They had to CGI this entire damn thing. Looks fake as shit. Anyways, that's my take on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. The Archimedes dial apparently is this real artifact called, I think what is it called? The Antikythera mechanism. And yet, it was only ever speculated that it had anything to do with Archimedes because it happened to be discovered in Syracuse, where Archimedes was supposed to have died. Apparently, it was used by its developers to predict future eclipses and other astrological events, and yet this movie comes up with a whole lot of bullshit that somehow or another Archimedes could use it to predict weather. He could use it to predict earthquakes. He could basically use it to predict everything, including distortions in time. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I was surprised to find out that this thing was an actual artifact, but the thing about it is that with things like the Ark of the Covenant and with the Holy Grail, and heck, even the Shankara stones and the Crystal Skull, most of everything that happens in those movies is based on the belief that this is what these things could actually do. The Crystal Skull not necessarily being aliens, but most people believe that Crystal Skulls do have some kind of psychic power to them. And with the Holy Grail, it's like you drink from the cup of Christ, you receive eternal life. The Ark of the Covenant, well, all you need to do is basically consult the Bible for that one. And the Shankara stones, they basically do have some connections with Hindu mythology, so if you're interested, look that up. But this thing, what you have is basically like this piece of astronomy that doesn't really do all that much. How do you get time travel from it? They had to make up a whole lot of BS in order to basically make this movie. And here's one of the things that I honestly really dislike about the whole idea that Archimedes' dial is the artifact that we go after in this movie. The fact that The actual Themi Antikythera mechanism was actually discovered in 1901, back when Indy would actually be a young child. So Indiana Jones goes on an adventure to discover something that had already long since been discovered. I think now you're starting to realize why this movie had it broken up into two pieces. But, anyways, that's my take on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. If there's one good thing to come out of this, it's hopefully that the similar phenomenon will finally happen as to what happened with the Star Wars sequel trilogy. As in, this movie is so bad, it will finally make people open their eyes and realize that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull really wasn't as bad as everyone wants to claim it was. Good night, everybody.